I think I screwed up right at the beginning. I didn't have that video playing. So that means when somebody watches this later, they're going to see our faces first, and then that video. So by the way, for you to help me next time, help me focus on 5 seconds left, and I got to do that stuff first. And another thing I'd like you to help me with, which you've already talked about a little bit, and somebody that watched our YouTube last time was giving me some advice to help me stop interrupting you so much. So I have a notepad now.
Well, let me interrupt you now, because what actually happens is that we really often have just thoughts that come rushing as you're listening to someone, and it makes some sense sometimes to just want to say that thought at a given time. And I do that sometimes.
And part of it is we're comfortable with each other, so we're okay doing that. But yeah, I do see how that can mess things up for the audience. So I'm going to try to get better. Anyway, today's topic, the fifth part of what is the future of Islam. And we want to talk about the two kinds of jihad. I'm pretty sure that's going to take the whole episode. So just real quick, I want to say what I know about this. And I don't know a lot. I didn't research a lot. I didn't know anything about these things while I was a Muslim, which, by the way, I think is very common for Muslims.
Yes.
At least in the era that I came about, I wasn't on the internet yet, really. And when I was on the internet, it was for a bit. I wasn't researching Islam yet. I didn't go on. Mm-hmm. I didn't get on the internet to research Islam until I left Islam. So maybe I'm a dinosaur. That's different than, what you see today is a lot of ex-Muslims. They're ex-Muslims by the time they're like 12 or 15. Mm-hmm. And they've already been on the internet a bunch. That's what helped them get out of it. So totally different exit strategy between me and them. So the two kinds of jihad, I want to say real quick from what I know, is just a basic thing. The one that's maybe not so bad, but I still think it's bad. It's like the struggle within. And actually, if I want to steelman this, okay, there's the way I've been describing it, there's a struggle between good and evil going on inside the mind of every single person, okay? And when evil wins in the mind of a person, that's when society has to put that person in jail. Meaning we have to, the battle of good and evil didn't get one inside the head, so we're going to have to do it from outside. And when good wins inside the head, that's like when, you prevented yourself from doing the thing that you thought of. Let's say maybe you thought of beating the shit out of someone and you said, no, I don't want to do that. That's a bad idea, Now, so jihad, the internal struggle version is related to the religious concept, which is, since the religion declares what the supposed bad things are, sins, and according to this religion and a lot of religions, the idea is if I want something and that religion calls it a sin, there's a struggle there, and I'm supposed to cave, right? That's just by default. I'm supposed to cave there. Right? Am I explaining that correctly? That's the good version of jihad?
Well, that's a whitewashed version of it that probably has... It's one that has been tailored for a specific audience. That's not how even that particular version is not exactly how Muslims typically view it.
Right, and I'll say that was me steelmanning without intention too. I'm trying to figure out what the best idea of what they were trying to do. Maybe there's some good in it, whatever. Like having the good win in your head is better than letting the evil win.
Well, I think in part what's actually happening here is that you are using the kind of rhetoric that has been very prevalent in the past maybe 10 or 20 years that has been presented by Muslims as what...
in other words, I was indoctrinated. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, so no, well, yes and no, because the worst type of or the most effective type of propaganda is not one that is a pure lie. It's one that has a truth that is twisted, exaggerated, rebranded in a certain way that would probably hide what the reality is, and what they want you to know is. So, first of all, the idea of jihad is, when you're just looking at the word on its own, it's just meaning struggle and effort. It doesn't have this kind of theological, religious implication just from the word itself. It's a word that people use in everyday life. When you say I'm putting an effort into this, أنا أضع جهدا, which is a word, juhd, it's a word that is directly connected to the same root. And the word jihad, or even mujahada, you would find in some resources, they use the word mujahada, is also there. The thing about this, however, is that this idea of inner struggle is a really Western idea. It has nothing to do with the way that Muslims do it, because this kind of idea empowers the individual way too much, where in fact, from the point of view of Muslims, you're actually supposed to be aware of people watching you, essentially, and making sure that you are behaving. So the discipline comes not from within exactly, it's coming from without. Let me give you a couple of items that are related to this. For example, if you want to do good and evil, it's not only something that depends on you. You have these supposed angels or watchers that watch every single move that you do, and that write down the good and bad deeds. And so you have these two watching you, and then you have the community itself watching you. And there's a very clear example of the implementation of this in reality, which is in Saudi Arabia, that has prevailed for a very long.
Morality police.
Yeah, morality police, exactly.
Which is like an official version, government sanctioned version of something that look, family do this too. On a small scale, anyone trying to shame another person,
yeah,
which happens all around the world. Maybe there's tribes. I say tribes. Maybe there's a tribe in Africa that didn't invent this concept. I don't know. But the rest of the world has it. It's very deep in our culture. It's one of those matrices that people need to escape. Okay. To add to that a little bit, I can do good without, what is it? Shaming myself for the bad things, something like that. Shame yourself so you don't do bad things. And it's like, and the way they say it, their logic is, if I don't feel shame, if I don't feel bad, then I'm gonna do the bad thing. That shit's retarded.
Right.
I'm getting angry. I need to calm down for a second. I get angry about stupid things. When I see stupid. I'll let you continue. Let me calm down.
Yeah, but the thing about this, it's essentially, it's not exactly a morality police as such. It's it has kind of a lengthy name. The police to enforce good and to prevent vice, or something of that sort. They have a long name. So it's a kind of an institutionalized way of imposing these ideas on people. They would go about in the streets looking for people who have done some violations, and they would basically, between reprimand them, arrest them, do whatever it is that they want to do. So this idea of inner struggle is not probably something I would emphasize too much as
it's more like a collectivized version of inner struggle, which
right.
seems
And that's
it, but
and that's exactly part of what I was going to be talking about, which is the fact that within a Muslim society, and we're looking here at how the whole thing grew originally, it was basically a society that was mobilized around a certain idea. And what happened then was that in order to mobilize the entire society, in order to achieve these things, certain things that were instituted in the society by whoever is running it. In that case, it was Muhammad. Was to impose some of these things for serving that greater goal.
well, let's be clear for everybody, and why even I put this in this episode or this series. What is the future of Islam? The internal struggle of jihad, the internal jihad or collectivized internal jihad, whatever. It's there for spreading Islam, but in a technically non-violent way, because it's mind control. And by the way, the purpose of for everyone to know, the purpose of mind control is so that you don't have to use physical violence. Not that they're not going to. It's an extra tool. They're using multiple tools, you know. But if you only had physical violence, this wouldn't have lasted 1,400 years. You know, this lasted 1,400 years because of this kind of jihad, the mind control version. I don't know if I interrupted. Oh, can we talk about what Sarah just asked here? How would you respond to Muslims who say the morality police or social monitoring to ensure Islamic behaviors are adhered to not because of Islam, but because of their culture?
I mean, what kind of culture do we have that is not affected by religion? So religion is part and parcel of what culture is. To say that this is completely removed from Islam, that you can say, well, this is their religion, as if we're considering this, as if we're considering religion as a part of an identity, like what you would have in the West, where people belong to very different things. They have various identities, and then religion is one of them. No, religion is in fact a part and parcel of what their culture is, and we're talking about a culture that has been affected by this for 1,400 years. So I don't think it's possible to make the separation.
I think your argument works well for people who are not Muslims, and I agree with it, obviously. I want to argue it for the Muslims for a moment. If you were speaking to a Muslim about this, about the religion versus culture, and that they see them as distinct, separate, kind of have nothing to do with each other. The way we see it is there was a culture, Islam was born out of it, and then Islam affected cultures, so it's also the culture. Religion and culture are the same thing. That's what you just said. Let's separate them for a moment to help the Muslims understand this. In order to understand if this is Islam or culture, well, ask where the fuck it came from. Is it written anywhere in Islam? Did Muhammad do it? Did the people around him do it?
Right.
Was there a morality police? Probably technically no.
Yeah, I mean, not in the sense that we have in a place like Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia was a kind of an exception where they went into the resources and just implemented those things as they stand. And so,
would you say stoning somebody and killing them, stoning somebody to death for sex out of marriage, wouldn't you say that's social monitoring?
That's definitely social monitoring.
Okay, did that happen during Muhammad's time?
It did.
Oh, okay. So is it Islam?
Well, yes, it is Islam, and it's.
Was it just Muhammad's culture, which has nothing to do with Islam? That would be funny. What does that even mean?
This
the problem with that is the Quran says follow Muhammad.
Yeah, and many of these stoning, including stoning, but probably it's something that also existed in various other cultures. This is something that was derived from biblical sources as well. So
So if we say it's culture and it's
yeah,
not Islam,
yeah,
then we would have to say there's a whole bunch of things in Islam that are not really Islam, and then you can't tell which ones are which. There's no rules.
yeah, and you cannot say that Islam is something that came from a different planet. It's building on well, it's supposed to have come from the sky, but that's even a further away. But what I'm saying is that when you see something that Muslims do, it's basically something that's building on previous practices. So, for example, something like chopping hands off. This might appear as something very odd. It's not something that has been practiced in the Bible. You don't find that people.
But it is older than Islam.
It's older than Islam, and it has been practiced before.
Let's name it. Okay, there's the famous one that they teach to American in public schools is it's called the Law of Hammurabi's Law or whatever. Mm-hmm. And supposedly the reason it's valuable is the reason it's worth teaching is it's the first time that laws were written down that everyone's supposed to follow. Now they were retarded laws, like the most extreme version that I know of that I think is even worse than anything in Islam, punishment wise.
Yeah,
is and it predates Islam by what, 1,000 years? I don't even know. Do you know? Like,
no, more than 1,000 years.
More than 1,000 years. So let me interject real quick. Yusuf, you can get on the live stream. Not right now. There's a form in the description to submit to get on the live stream, like to request. He's speaking in Hebrew. Can you say that?
He's just saying hi, shalom.
Okay. So now I interrupted myself. What the hell was I saying? What was it? Do you remember? This is why I shouldn't let this happen sometimes. I wrote it down. No, that was finished already. I guess we can go to the next topic. Maybe I'll remember it.
No, it was actually something important that you were saying.
I know. Of course I only say important things. I try to avoid not important things. That made it worse. Saying that joke just. I was talking about mind control, collective mind control. Oh, we were talking about the history, and whether these Hammurabi, more than 1,000 years older than Islam, and the extreme law that I think is worse than anything that Islam says is if someone gets raped. So like if you make it easier, because if you rape my wife, the punishment is I get to rape your wife.
Oh yeah,
and here's the point, everyone. Obviously, this is very misogynistic. It's seeing the woman as just an object of the man. It's not a human by herself. Her wants don't matter. And Islam doesn't have anything that bad, I don't think.
Yeah, you.
I don't know. It's hard to judge how evil something is to another.
Exactly. It's not easy to say this is worse than this. We're talking about something that predates any kind of true civil society, and so in order to create some kind of real control, you end up with these tribal acts that are meant to punish not the individual but the group. And so if you end up doing something like that under the auspices of the state, that prevents those revenge wars where you have one tribe trying to kill another or trying to get back at one another. And so it can make some sense in that ancient society. It's stupid, but you can see where it's coming from.
The value in having laws at all is just this basic thing that without the laws, then it's complete mayhem. Yeah. Anyone doing anything, and no one's worried about, well, is the society going to be okay with this? Maybe I shouldn't do this. Of course, now if the laws are also evil, that presents its own problems. But if you also combine this with we improve our laws over time, we reach to where we are today.
Right. But I would also claim something else, that some of these laws are not really, they don't need to be instituted in written form or in some kind of an explicit.
Or with a government punishment.
Yeah, because eventually, if you end up with a society where everybody steals from everybody, everybody kills everybody, that's not a society that can live. It's just going to kill itself. It would just wither away, and it's not going to proceed beyond a certain level of development.
Are you saying something like, okay, if you go back far enough, before the whole planet was filled, I don't know, 5,000 years ago or something, you're saying maybe there was cultures or tribes that was one way, complete mayhem, no laws, and there's tribes that did have laws, and the tribes that had laws, even though there were some bad laws, iterated with improvement over time, and the ones that had no laws, they just destroyed themselves and vanished?
Probably we don't have to think about laws as such. So think about it this way. Imagine that you have someone who keeps stealing from everybody. A particular person who is a thief. And we're talking here about an individual who does that. We're not talking about the entire society doing it. Once that happens, the society is going to be acting against that person in order to prevent the damage that they are doing. And so that person could be shunned, could be punished in one way in order to stop this.
That works if you're a tiny minority in the majority of good guys.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say good and bad. It's just the good of the entire society is going to be better served if you act against.
That's what I mean by good and bad there.
Yeah, but it's from the perspective of the thief, the good is to steal. So it's
yeah, and he's confused about what good is. Okay, anyway, so just like with jihad and all that, it's all an issue of whether, I've been saying good and evil, but of course the big chunk of people who are doing what I claim is evil, they think it's good.
Yeah. So for example, take someone like Hitler. Do you think that he thought of himself as a bad person? I don't think so.
I think he did that thing we discussed a bunch of episodes ago on I don't know what, which was this concept of means to an end.
Yeah.
If they believe their end goal is good, and if they also have this logic of any means to an good end is a good means,
yes,
then therefore any evil thing becomes good.
Exactly.
And I think they struggle with that a little bit, but they still sort of fool themselves. Oh, yes. No, I did good because my end goal was good.
Exactly. And that's in part, that's actually what we're trying to talk about today, because when you think about the idea of killing in itself, that's bad. But when you think, well, if you're part of an army, for example, and this doesn't have to do with jihad, if you're part of an army and you're fighting for a cause that you believe in, then you are doing something that's in every society is supposed to be bad. You're trying to kill other people, but you believe that you're doing that in order to serve a certain goal that's even higher or more sublime than whatever casualties who are going to be dying because of this.
And just to be clear, what we were just talking about, we're talking about the Islamic version of doing evil because of this logic means to an end. But Islam and Muslims are not the only ones that do it. The first time we talked about it on air was about the US and the guys that take us to wars with propaganda as their means to control us. Anyway, they're doing the same kind of thing. Let's see here. Harry's saying this is stimulating and makes a change from the norm on YouTube. Thank you. Harry's said he's wants to network for us and help us connect with other YouTubers.
That's wonderful.
Because he saw somebody said on my YouTube in the comments, hey, can you connect with these people? And I'm like, hey, yeah, I love to, and I do, but they all ignore me. So their audiences need to connect us. So Harry saw that and said, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Let's see. Perhaps he also devolved and went more insane than he began to. Are we talking about Muhammad here? Probably.
I mean, this can apply to so many
people. Okay. Yusuf is saying, no, they designed eugenics and were evil. You cannot excuse what they did and say they weren't evil. That's crazy. Who's saying who wasn't evil? I don't remember somebody saying somebody wasn't evil.
I think he's referring to Hitler and
yeah, I agree he's evil, but we were talking about in his head what he thinks he's doing. Yeah.
No,
oh, he sent us an email. I guess that's about to call in or something, or maybe it's about the networking. So do you have more comments to talk about this version of Jihad? And actually, I want to remind you about your slides.
Yeah, let me actually.
I never got to the second version, but everyone knows it's the violent thing. That one's kind of obvious, right? Spread Islam, use violent jihad to spread Allah's word, whatever. That's the dumb version I have in my head.
Okay, let me actually try to find this. Here we go. Right. So one of the things that comes up very often when you hear Muslims talk about jihad is that you're actually looking at the wrong place in the Quran, that the Quran and the Muslim rhetoric has so many places that are conciliatory, that are meant to present a kind of a coexistent religion that is seeking peace. And very often they would quote, one of the things that gets quoted is the no compulsion in religion verse. And on the other hand, you have these other verses that explicitly talk about killing those who do not believe in Allah. And so how is it that these things sit together? How do we actually understand what's going on? The main thing here is to actually think about reading the Quran chronologically instead of just saying, this is a kind of a continuous body that has a kind of a self-consistent set of ideas that are presented in a way that has no contradictions. All religious texts have contradictions. And this has to do with the fact that, in part, it's something that has been written over a long period of time. Supposedly, the Quran was written over a period of 23 years. Under two very different conditions, one in Mecca, one in Medina. And so you have to think about this whole thing as a kind of a chronological progression of the events that Muhammad underwent and his community in connection with how they were dealing with their surroundings. First with the idolaters, who are not really idolaters, they were just associators of Allah with other deities. And then you have the Christians and the Jews, and then you have the broader world beyond that. And so if you go back to the very beginning, the place where something like no compulsion in religion took place, the other verse that Barack Obama, for example, quoted at one point where he's quoting the infidels surah that talks about you have your religion, I have my religion, and it goes into something like that. And it seems to be something even secular, giving the people the ability to have and adopt their own religion. So I would call that the Taqiyya stage, where people at the time did not have the ability to impose their ideas.
Remind people what Taqiyya is?
Yeah, Taqiyya is a kind of a pragmatic hypocrisy, let's say, that lets the Muslim say what he doesn't actually believe. At the time, it might not have been the case. We're talking about way back at the very beginning of Islam. It might have been the case that he was really thinking about coexistence. He never really thought about being able to dominate his tribe in the way that he did. And so it might have been genuine. But if you look at the subsequent practice of Muslims as they started conquering places and being communities in other places, you start seeing that this is a stage that really explicitly happens very often. So you have that, and this is something that you see very commonly in places today where Muslims are not the majority, where Muslims don't have power. Then comes the defensive stage where they start acting, but not in a way that would be offensive. And then the offensive stage, that's when Muhammad went to Medina and started attacking caravans that are coming from Mecca, and then started overpowering other tribes. And then you have that global stage after they were able to establish themselves in Arabia and started expanding beyond it. So I don't know if you have some comments on this, or you had some ideas that you wanted.
We have some comments. I don't know if this is too related. You and I discussed this a little bit, that the Sunnis don't focus so much on Taqiyya the way the Shia do, and we talked about why it's the case, but it's not a scripture thing, and it's a happenstance of history where the Shia were always in a small minority to the majority, in an atmosphere where, you know, minorities are oppressed big time.
To some extent, but it does have.
You need to lie more to protect yourself. So that's the Shia way.
It does have some scriptural backing. It's just that for Sunnis, because they have been the majority for such a long time, it's not something that usually comes up, and that's why they would say, well, look, that's a Shia thing, and in fact it helps them denigrate the Shiites because of the fact that there is a group in the Quran, the hypocrites, al-munafiqun, which has a whole section of verses about it. So just to give a context of who these hypocrites were, when Muhammad went to Medina and was able to impose his power there, there were people obviously who opposed him. Not everybody was happy with him becoming king of this polity where he came from a different town, left his people, brought his mercenaries with him, and now he wants to impose his power. So some people started opposing him. And some of the opposition was a kind of an underground thing where they would act in a way, and then they would act in a way that seems to be supporting him, but in reality doesn't conform with what they're actually doing behind his back, if you will. And so even though he was acting with that kind of hypocrisy himself when he was in Mecca, he now started denigrating that group. And that's why the Sunnis themselves, when they want to think about Taqiyya, they associate it with Shiite minority as a negative thing.
I mean, another aspect of it is, and I think every or almost every Muslim has this, you know, we were told to believe that our religion is good. And so if somebody tells us our religion is bad, our first thought from this framework of thinking, which isn't the correct way of thinking, but it's the way that we're told before we learn scientific thinking, for example, we're told that, you know, the first thought you have is, no, you're wrong. That's not what Islam is, because Islam is good. Obviously, you're like, there's a contradiction there, and they just land on, hey, you're just saying something wrong about Islam. I forgot why I brought this up. Why did that come up? Do you remember?
So we were talking in the context of Taqiyya.
Yeah. Oh. So the Sunnis, if somebody says, "Hey, your Sunni Islam also has Taqiyya," and if you don't know much, your first thought is, "No way, that sounds crazy. Of course not. Taqiyya sounds evil. Islam's not evil, therefore there's no Taqiyya in our Islam." Oh, but Shia does, because they talk about it all the time. That's not. There's not a lot of thinking going on there, but
Well,
that's just a lot of
there's a lot of denigration on both sides, and you can imagine that for something that has been able to last, a feud that has been able to last for 1400 years, there is something that's fueling it. It's not something that can just fade away. But both sides demonize each other.
Is there a big feud? I guess there's. I don't know where the feud is, because in my entire time of being a Muslim, and maybe I don't count because I lived in the U.S., I never heard Sunnis and Shias fighting each other. Even my parents never said, "Hey, you're Sunni."
Okay.
I didn't know what Sunni and Shia was.
Well, let me give you something.
Happening.
Let me give you something from my own experience. So, living in a predominantly Sunni society, and one that mainly supported Iraq in its fight against Iran, we were flooded with messages about how the Shiites are bad. In fact, the moment that you see
they were propagandizing you against the Iranians.
Yeah. So
who are 80% Shia, while Iraq is 80% Sunni.
Right. And so in my mind, the moment I would see the flag of Iran, I would basically I'm conditioned to see something that's evil.
Okay, but that's again, aside from there being something there from 1400 years ago, or it's something that's reinvigorated by current leaders who are trying to mind control people politically.
Right. So that's to some extent what's actually happening in a situation where you have equilibrium, more or less, that's been lasting for quite a long time now. So that you have the Shiites mainly in Iran, a little bit of Pakistan in pockets here and there. And so you have this kind of equilibrium that is not going into an open conflict. But over the centuries, there has been a lot of conflict. And the fact that you have these two groups that have been separated based on that original conflict, that tells you that there's always the potential for something to develop into a conflict if there's some kind of conflict of interest.
It sounds to me like, and I want to get back to the point on defensive stage, but it sounds to me like all these negative aspects have to be reinvigorated in order to remain there and continue as a thing in the next generation. If it's not reinvigorated, I think it goes away.
I think right now it's at a stage where it has been so entrenched in theological beliefs that it's not something that it can lay dormant. Let's say this way, it can lay dormant, but it's not something that can be abolished.
It's dormant in a couple of ways. One way, it's written in a book 1400 years ago or whatever. And another way it's dormant is like even, ideas in our heads that pass on from generation to generation, cultural things that aren't necessarily written in a book anywhere. Like the concept of shame, by the way. Or actually, let's say the concept of revenge. Like, the revenge is really old. Eye for an eye is really old. It goes back to at least as old as Judaism. I'm sure it's much older than that.
Yeah.
It was a thing before we wrote stuff like that down. Similar to language, by the way. We had language, spoken language. Then afterwards, we decided to write down what that is. And we had grammar, spoken grammar. And later, somebody figured out, hey, let's write down what the rules are. We didn't invent the rules after the fact. This is a little bit similar. These ideas that are in Islam that are also written in the Quran, they're ideas that are much older, much more complex than what's written in the Quran too. Like the concept of revenge, a little bit of that is in the Quran. It doesn't explain it very well.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It has a very shitty version of it. It's on the wrong side of that concept too.
It's not just that particular concept. Any kind of concept in the Quran you would actually see is explained in a very cryptic way that's not clear enough, and that's one of the reasons why you have all those interpretations, all those exegeses that start from the text of the Quran, and then you start looking for traditions, for hadiths that would support that. Some of these hadiths were particularly actually invented well after the fact in order to support a certain position for how you would want to interpret this. So that's why you end up with so many different ways of looking at a specific verse. Like, for example, no compulsion in religion. What does that actually mean? Is it something that's saying, oh, well, you can believe whatever you want? That's not how it works. There is a very specific way to think about this. If you go into Islam, you are not supposedly being forced to go into Islam, at least in that particular stage. There are certain ways to control this. But then if you want to leave Islam, now there's compulsion, because you would have a very specific punishment. Going into the place is not the same as leaving. So it's not something that's absolute.
I want to be clear for everybody. This concept is much broader than just Islam or even religion. This concept of making a law or even just any statement that is so vague, intentionally making it vague, so that I can punish whoever I want.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, the US does this. They make laws. The politicians make laws so that in essence, it's so vague, anything is punishable, but they don't punish everybody. They punish the people who are not their friends, and they excuse the people that are their friends. That's how they design it. And the way you do that is you say vague ass shit like no compulsion in religion. 4 fucking words? How many words is it? Like, you know, if you're going to make a law like this, you better write a 2,000 word essay at minimum to explain how it works in various circumstances and shit like that. And maybe the Quran actually has some of that. You know, if you just say the statement, no compulsion in religion, and you don't look at the context, I think that's stupid. And I don't even know the context of that. I know the context of the whole of Islam and history, so that helps. But, you know, that what I always hear, the defense of this thing is no compulsion in religion is what was it? It was during the Medina era, right?
Yeah.
He hadn't started war yet.
So let me quickly see here. So no compulsion in religion. This is a Medinan verse,
right?
So this appeared at a time when let's go back to the Meccan period. In the Meccan period,
people should know a little bit more too. People who are watching, Muhammad was like born and raised in Mecca. Mecca is the, well, everyone knows what Mecca is because it's a phrase used everywhere. You know, you're American. We say the phrase the Mecca of, and stick any word next. It's the center of whatever you want to call. And so that's where Islam started. That's where he was born and raised. That's where he invented Islam. And he got like 100 followers peacefully in Mecca. And then I don't know the details, but he wasn't succeeding more than that. And maybe they pushed him out in some way. And then he went to Medina. And now this is the part you're explaining.
Yeah. So at the beginning, there wasn't even a way to talk about compulsion or no compulsion, because the people who followed him in Mecca were just poor people, slaves, people who were of no means. Basically, there were just a handful of people. Some people say tens, some people say hundreds of people, but it wasn't a force to start talking about compulsion. It was when he was able to recruit a certain group of mercenaries that was actually used by his grandfather. These are called Sa'alik. These are basically the rejects of all the tribes that he started gaining power. And when by the time that he reached Medina, he was starting to be able to talk about compulsion or no compulsion. But before that, when he was in Mecca, that was completely out of the question.
Okay, so what's the defensive stage?
So that's basically a kind of a stage that got derived afterwards from the way that Muhammad started fighting against the other tribes. Now, the initial thing that happened was after he established his base in Medina, he was actually the one who started the war. He started attacking caravans of the Quraysh, his family in Mecca. And at one point, he was able to create a situation where they had to fight him. That's the Battle of Badr. And that was the very first fight that showed he was actually able to get some gain. Those people who were with him.
And he didn't start the war.
He started the war.
So why did you say defensive?
Well, I'm getting to the point where this is the situation. So he didn't actually get to the point of defensive war right away. What happened afterwards was that he put his people in a situation where the Quraysh started having to fight him. So, for example, the next fight, the Battle of Uhud, was one where they started having clashes, and he actually lost this one, and he started to become a power to be reckoned with in Arabia, and that's why it became a situation where he might receive an offense from someone else, and they would have to be defensive when they are weak. And it's a kind of an extrapolation of that situation that Muslims started thinking about. A defensive war is a war in which you go and fight against a threat that's coming from the outside. But you have also the offensive war, and we're going to be looking at different texts from the Quran that actually talk about this if we have time. You have defensive stages and you have offensive stages. And then once everything was established in such a way that they have enough power, it became that global idea of invading as much as possible. So this was powered by two different things. The first one is that the followers were seeing gains, material gains. You have all that booty that is obtained from the enemy. You have all those slaves, all that land, everything. So you have that worldly bonus that you would get from this. And then you also have this idea that if you were to fight and die, you also have the possibility of going in to paradise.
Not possibility. I thought it was guaranteed.
Right. So I'm talking that if you were to die, then yes, that would be a possibility, because the other situation is not to die and to get the to get that worldly gain. But if you die, yes, you're right. If you were to die as
now, what if a girl killed you? Then you go to hell, or what? I don't know how they're confused about this. Have you heard about this, where the ISIS people are freaking out when they see a female soldier, like the Yazidi ones?
They would consider it to be a kind of a shameful thing, because the whole idea.
They're worried about their shame in this planet while thinking they're gonna get heaven from martyrdom. They're worried about the shame here. That's really weird.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, I know all of it's weird, but it's just a new one I found.
I think we might want to look at a couple of comments before we go
Sure.
to.
How about this one? He's asking us. Harry's asking us. Like, go ahead and read that question. Like,
Okay. To understand the Quran chronology, would you depend on the usual tafsirs? Yes and no. So there is a canonical chronology of the Quran that has been, well, more or less. There are a couple of chronologies that Muslims have adopted for a very long time. Modern scholarship, starting with Theodore Noeldeke, and then after that, um, like what's his first name, Sinai and Neuwirth, they have other chronologies that more or less coincide with that. And so the tafsirs do give you a kind of a starting point, but we shouldn't take it at face value because they depend on traditions that are called asbab al-nuzul, the causes for the revelation or the occasions for the revelations. And these very often are just made up stories that you cannot really rely on very heavily. So, for example, take the very first surah that is supposedly revealed, Surah Al-Alaq, that's Surah 96. This has so much similarity to a biblical text, I believe in Deuteronomy. I don't remember right now, and it also has a kind of a similarity with an English fable of all places. So there is a kind of a commonality that seems to stem from some previous story that has been circulating around that for some reason they adopted as the beginning of the revelation. So we cannot really rely on that reliably. And unfortunately, it's something that people, even in the West, at the very beginning, when they started thinking about the history of Islam, they relied on. But in the past century, fortunately, people have started going more deeply into this and started seeing other things. There's a lot to say about this.
I think it was Sweden. There was a guy who's pushing for a law that requires that any translation of the Quran has to be put in chronological order.
There is, I mean, when you take the Quran and look at the way that it's put together, you can see that the larger texts are at the beginning. You start with Al-Fatiha, then Al-Baqarah, the heifer, and then it goes in more or less in order of size. And because of this, when you're reading the Quran, you don't actually have a sense of what came before what. You have it's basically a big mix of a big mess of texts that are not clear, and they're not clear in terms of the content, but also not clear in terms of the chronology.
All right, we have like technically 5 minutes left. Why don't we continue?
Right. So let me go here. Let me talk a little bit about the idea of the defensive jihad. So here are a couple of verses that basically frame this idea. There are different translations, and very often in English, unfortunately, people start quibbling about the translations. This means this, no, this translator means this. But this is essentially how the idea of defensive jihad is framed. So, for example, the first one, and fight until persecution is no more, and religion is all for Allah. But if they cease, then lo, Allah is seer of what they do. So there's a
How's
kind
that defensive? Because I'm hearing until religion, fight until religion is all for Allah. That means fight until there's no more non-Muslims.
right, but At the same time, this can be interpreted as saying that they have ceased fighting. Some people have interpreted it this way, that the fighting has ceased, and so you stop fighting. That doesn't mean that there is peace. It means that there is a truce. And that's the thing about this whole thing, that the fighting is always going to be
More
in
of that vague bullshit. It can mean anything. It could mean 1,000 things.
exactly. That's the ambiguity I was talking about at the beginning. You don't have a well-defined way of seeing a kind of a clear-cut idea that's being laid down, and
Now, maybe that's a double-edged sword. At the
that's
same time,
yeah.
it's bad in the sense that people can use it for bad things, but maybe that's also the same way it can be good, because now everyone can say, no, Islam is peaceful. Stop doing this evil shit.
Well, that's the thing about what the new rhetoric is. The problem with it is that it's very precarious and it goes against the tradition. You can say, well, Islam is saying that. Well, don't say what Islam is saying. Let's see what Islam acts. Let's look at the actions and how people actually interpret this. And the inertia of the history doesn't actually coincide with this type of interpretation.
So I think what you're saying is it would be a mistake and cause us harm if people are going around saying, no, Islam doesn't really say those bad things. Islam says this good thing. Let's start doing good.
Yeah. So how do you actually enforce this kind of thing? If you're saying that this is what Islam is saying, how do you actually practically enact this idea?
Only a bunch of people saying it on Twitter, and that's it.
That's exactly. So it's a kind of a propaganda. If you want to actually do it, you have to show that the people who
well, what I'm asking is it bad in the sense that it's giving a defense to the evil guys?
I mean, it hides the truth of what's actually happening. Again, presenting something as a half truth is really a very dangerous thing, because you are.
You're against it. I'm against it too.
Yeah. Because you are trying to envelop something that's bad with a kind of a thin layer of encasement that doesn't actually represent the truth.
War is deception. How do you pronounce that? Sun Tzu?
Sun Tzu.
And I'm guessing that is very far east, maybe Japanese, something like that.
It is also an exact quote that is often attributed to Muhammad. Al-Harbu Khadi'a.
What does it mean?
It means that you, at least let me give you the Muslim interpretation of this. It means that you're going to be doing whatever you want to do in order to achieve your goal. The goal is going to justify any kind of means that you're going to be doing to achieve that goal.
Sorry, my brain. Say that one last sentence again.
So, for example, I think the historical context for when Muhammad said that, he was marching. One of his armies marched against the Romans, and it took a month. And just from hearing that they are marching against them, the army fled and didn't face the Muslims. And
I think the basic point you're saying is when you're doing war, you need to do deception to win.
Yeah, it's not something specifically,
and they do it all the time. Good on the good side and the bad side, and yeah, there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
What might be wrong is having initiated the war in the first place.
Well, what's even worse is that you're not considering war as a mode that can be switched off, but as a kind of a mode of existence. That's the scary thing, because when you're saying that, if you look at that first verse and you interpret it from that perspective, and fight until persecution is no more. When is it no more? Is it when they stop fighting, or is it when there is no other religion? Because there are other verses that give that impression, and so if the whole thing is a kind of not just mode of existence, a modus operandi for the entire religion, that it's all only going to fulfill its goal when everybody on earth is a Muslim, that means that it's never going to end. And that's that's essentially one of the things I was going to get to at one point.
Just to give a defense to Islam in general and Muslims and the whole ummah of the whole 1400 years, for someone to say it's not going to change or you can't change it, and a lot of them, their defense is, oh no, it's written in the Quran. Well, I was about to argue about the Jews, and they also have it written in their book, and they rejected a bunch of that. But I heard somebody recently say, well, no, look what Israel's doing. They're still doing it. Anyway.
No, I think it's possible to change. It's not just because of the fact that they believe that this is the speech of the creator of the universe, that this is just something they cannot change. That doesn't mean that the interpretation can never be changed, that there's not going to be a Muslim culture at some point that's going to completely reject this, or that's going to suspend this indefinitely, or whatever. It's just that right now we're not at that stage.
Sarah's saying, I'm not sure I understand this. The Quran is showing that violence is the answer to persecution. Very peaceful. But persecution, isn't that violent or not necessarily?
Well, I mean, it depends. And the reason why this might be interpreted as a defensive statement is that if you're being attacked by someone, you attack back, basically. But at the same time, like Sarah was saying, you can also interpret this in a different way. If there is another type of action that is interpreted as something against Muslims, you might consider that as a persecution and go act on it.
And that's what they say about us. So this organization, Uniting the Cults, the main goal to rid the world of apostasy laws. When I talk to Muslims about this, they, not all of them, but some of them just say, yeah, I'm with you. Some of them say, no, there isn't actually death penalty in Islam for apostasy. What they say is, the way it works is, when ex-Muslims speak out, I'm using my words, but their words is something else, like get Muslims to leave Islam. If I say something that works towards helping a Muslim leave Islam, that's what they're saying is the bad thing that they want to fight against.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a very common argument. Yes.
Harry says that's such a great goal, and he supports the goal 110%. Did you get to that second paragraph?
So I'm not sure if we actually should. Yeah, since it's on the screen, let's talk a little bit about it. How should ye not fight for the cause of Allah and of the feeble among men and the women, etc. So you're talking here about a situation that is portraying some group that is feeble and is being persecuted. There is a kind of a legitimacy that gives this kind of defensive war that comes from this humanitarian impulsion to defend them. So this type of description of a defensive war seems to be a kind of a more legitimate way, and it seems to be okay. So people defending themselves is not something that is inherently bad. The way that they're going to be implementing it might be an issue, but in principle, that seems to be a legitimate way of talking about it. And this is considered a defensive jihad from the perspective of many Muslims.
So I just want to say to everyone, we're going to talk about jihad and its relationship to everything Islam-wise and ex-Muslims and the world later in another episode. We're probably done talking about it here, and I think this series of 5 units, What is the Future of Islam, is probably done also. There is something I wanted to hit on more, but we've already talked about it a little bit, and I think we just dedicate a whole episode to it. The closed society versus the open society, and discussing the Islamic Golden Age, and the ancient Greece and the Enlightenment era, and the whole point of that is to understand the growth of societies, the evolution of societies, which you need in order to understand the future of the Islamic society in the context of the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
And I also want to tell everyone about what's going to happen next episode. So I think what we should do. Why is this not going away? Let's see. I think what we should do the next episode. And by the way, it flip flopped us. I don't know. I don't know. And now it looks goofy or maybe that looks better. I don't know. With the books next to each other. By the way, no one's made any comments about those two things. I don't think anyone's noticed. Let's see if anyone notices. Anyway, the next episode, I would like it to be what I think is like the most important thing. Maybe more important than what is the future of Islam. It's to do with helping ex-Muslims and really Muslims too unindoctrinate themselves. And the main thing here is the fear of hell. Because to be clear, even when you get rid of the fear of hell, you still have a lot of other things you need to unindoctrinate yourself with. So the umbrella here is unindoctrinate, mainly the fear of hell, and then how to actually do that. People don't know how to do it, and that's obviously why they're stuck in that. Just imagine to a non-Muslim, to somebody that's never really been in religion, that's the better way to say it. To an atheist who's never been in a religion, imagine being an ex-Muslim, not believing in Islam, having arguments and stuff, but you have a fear of hell. And they know it's weird too. The people who have this, they say it on Reddit, on the ex-Muslim subreddit. I know this is weird. I'm fully convinced, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But still, why am I fearing this? Help me out of it. So they need a lot of help. We need to help them. I think that's going to be a series. And it might be longer than 5 units.
Yeah. And there's a lot that can be said about it, definitely.
Yes. And it's going to get into a lot of things. It's going to get into the scientific approach. By the way, I got to tell you and the audience, I wrote an article like 3-ish years ago, or maybe longer than that now. It's the scientific approach written for a lay audience, for general audience. And it's written in a magazine style. And I wanted to develop it. I actually wrote another article afterwards, actually explaining the scientific approach for a more sophisticated audience. And then I realized, because of new technology, because I've been doing this recently on other things, I took that essay and ran it through a text-to-speech AI thing, and I had to manipulate a little bit. And it sounds really good. It's a video essay.
Okay.
And it's only 29 minutes. I think it's really good. I re-impressed myself. I actually forgot a little bit of what was in there. And I reminded myself of by watching it. And I've been using this as, something ex-Muslims ask a lot, and maybe Muslims too, even before they leave. Because it's a little bit vague of when you actually leave. Everyone has different definitions too. When you would count yourself a ex-Muslim versus a Muslim. What they ask is, hey, what do you believe now that you don't believe in the old thing? And obviously, to me, it's obvious. There's a void there. They removed something and they didn't replace it with anything. And what their view of atheists is, the words that get thrown around are nihilism, nothing matters, right? There's atheists that say that stuff. I think they're stupid. They don't know what they're talking about. The people who say atheism implies materialism, that shit's retarded too. Another way they say it is this: if you don't what do you believe in if not for Allah? And the standard reply in the ex-Muslim subreddit is they just say one word: atheism. That's not an answer to the question, and it's a misunderstanding of the question. The question is, what's your whole goddamn worldview?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that is going to touch into things like morality, justice. It's gonna have to address every question they had coming from their religion. So if they had thoughts like, and a lot of people do, if they had thoughts like, shouldn't there be a God because we want punishment for the evildoers? Well, your worldview, your new worldview, better fucking have an answer to that question. If it doesn't, you got a major problem. Now, a lot of people don't need that in their worldview because they didn't have that dumb part of it in their old worldview. I didn't have that. I was a Muslim, but I didn't have that dumb idea. So I didn't need to make a worldview that has it in there. But of course, I am trying to help other people, right? So I kind of need to build it in anyway. I don't really know how to build that one in. I've seen other people talk about it. I don't know what the fuck they're talking about. To me, it's a little bit similar to people talk about spirituality a lot. I never talk about it. I half the time don't even know what they're saying when they talk about it. But then I found out there's a bunch of things that I think about that they see is categorized under spirituality, and I never did, but apparently it is.
Yeah.
To be. Like I talk about love. Apparently that is what they say spirituality is. Okay, fine. So I'm spiritual because I talk about love? All right. To me, it's just all fucking semantics. I don't know why you're dividing shit up in these weird, dumb categories.
Have you seen the most recent book by Jordan Peterson? What is it? Struggling with God or something like that. And he basically, one of the claims that in the book, I didn't read the book, but I've seen a few people review it. One of the claims is that there is no such thing as an atheist because atheists in their heart of hearts believe in God, and the God that he talks about is a kind of a redefinition, like you're saying right now. Something like love is considered to be part of spirituality. Well, I didn't know that. All of a sudden, maybe I have some spirituality.
Right. Although there's more to the spirituality thing. And by the way, we're going to do a whole series on that too, not just one episode. And I want to have Hani on for that, at least for one of those episodes. By the way, I'm going to have him on the podcast too. We did a little talk. He's amazing. I want to do as many episodes as I can with him. Oh, and I also am asking him to be a backup third person for you and I being missing.
Okay.
By the way, I really do not want to do this alone if you're not here. I do not. I think it would suck. But having him as a backup would be great. And same vice versa. If I'm missing and you're here, I don't think you'll like it doing it alone. You'll need him.
Yeah, definitely.
So about this, I was trying to say something about spirituality. Oh, one thing that the spiritualists say a lot, the people who care about the label spirituality, is you see these sentences like, I didn't have a connection. I didn't feel an emotional connection with God. That's why they got out or whatever. I never had that. I think that is a core part of spirituality.
Yeah.
But I never had that. But then I also care about love. But I'll be clear. When I was a Muslim, that was not in my head. And I didn't think about love for God. That sounds insane to me. And I did hear people talk about loving Muhammad, which is also insane.
Well, the problem here is that you hear a lot of love in connection with Christianity, but in Islam there is no such thing. That type of speech, that kind of personal relationship that you would have with God is non-existent.
Do Muslims in general, and I mean the deep Muslims, not the like Americanized Muslims like me. And Christianized, I'm like a more Christianized version of Islam, right? By being in America and being around Christians everywhere. The Muslims in Saudi Arabia and Syria and those places, do they talk about wanting an emotional connection to God?
Not quite. It's a very different kind of thing from Christianity. So let me maybe give a kind of an analogy. So because of the fact that Jesus was supposed to be an embodiment of God in the form of a human, you have that more direct connection. And the fact that he's the son of God creates a kind of a fatherly relationship. Whereas in the case of Islam, you have this slave master relationship. Um, and to some extent, this has to do with a kind of a literal translation in the Quran of the word Adonai in Hebrew, which means more or less my master. And it persisted throughout the Quran. And so when you say, for example, Abdullah, for example, the slave of Allah, your relationship is that of a slave to a master, and not one that involves a kind of a loving relationship as you would imagine in the context of a human relationship between.
So a mean father, not a loving father.
A master. I would say a master to a slave.
Okay, not a nice master, a mean master.
No, that's not how they view it. They would view him as a just master. He says a lot about being compassionate in the Quran, although I would really contest that idea. The idea of compassion, even though it's a very prominent word that appears in so many different ways, I don't think it applies in a very explicit way apart from mentioning that word.
So Sarah says the emotional connection to Allah is common in Sufism.
Yes.
Sufism started, I don't know, 900 years ago with the help of Ibn Sina, a philosopher who I think was an ex-Muslim. And
it was before that.
Before that too?
I would say it's before that.
But is it that man, or is it before him also?
No. I wouldn't attribute it to a specific person, because it has it's basically building on some previous Persian practices that were already there.
Previous religions, or previous to Islam, is the point.
Yeah. For the people who eventually became Muslim or were forced to become Muslims, some of those practices got infused within Islam, and
which is what we said before. When Islam or any culture invades another one, or even doesn't invade, just goes there peacefully, the cultures mix. It can't erase all of it. So, of course, if there was an area that's very spiritual and Islam goes there, that Islamic version becomes spiritual.
And in fact, with Sufism, if you look at the poetry that's there, interestingly, by the way, many of the original Sufists were actually women. They would talk about love for God, and very often it glides into physical, carnal love. We're not necessarily talking about a kind of
Pardon? Love? What are you talking about? What are you talking about?
The poetry that you would read can be very sensual in that sense.
Oh my God. Okay. I don't want to go R-rated or X-rated here, so let's move on a little bit. Mulhid al-Islam says, why spirituality doesn't make sense, because then that means we have spirits. And that is what the main problem I had with it. I was from a world of caring about science and physics. And when I heard the word spirituality, and I think even when I was a Muslim, I thought spirits, and I don't believe in spirits. Like demons.
Yeah, maybe I can say something about this, because very often, let's think about someone like Carl Sagan. That's one of the biggest influences on me personally when I was growing up. Okay. Very often you would hear him say things that can be considered something spiritual. Okay. Even though he wasn't religious, he could have been an atheist, even though he never actually admitted to being an atheist. But very often what he would say about the sense of awe that he has towards the universe, towards the natural phenomena, can be very often reinterpreted from the perspective of religious people as something that would coincide with spirituality. So it's not something that has a direct connection, like Mulhad was talking about this, in something that connects with spirit as such. This is something that grew under the auspices of religion and was using that speech and type of terminology that came from religion. It doesn't have to be in that context. It has.
I think it's just a bunch of people getting confused by words.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I'm saying, basically.
That's it. Semantics problems. Man, it's getting annoying. By the way, I've been testing out ChatGPT on some big serious stuff, okay? When we talked last about ChatGPT, I was telling you how bad it is. Recently, recently, I've been having really deep discussions with it, and I find it better than most humans I'm talking to.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm having it explain free will. Actually, I had it. Here's what I did. Here's the latest test I'm running. I told it, hey, ChatGPT, I've been running these experiments on you or whatever, and I've been posting it, and people have been saying that you're not really rational or whatever, and that I'm leading you on. So how can we figure out what the thing is? And as much as I can, I'm trying to not give it ideas. And then it said, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, I am rational, but not in the way the human is, blah, blah, blah. But we can figure out a way to test it. I think I'm the one who said Turing test. And then I said, can you make a Turing test? And it came up with one. I don't think it's good. It was dumb a little bit. Somebody on, I think Jordan Peterson subreddit said in response to one of my posts about ChatGPT or whatever, said, the way ChatGPT is right now, it makes him think of the skill level of a college student when it comes to using words, making sentences, but the skill level of an 8-year-old when it comes to critical thinking. Which is weird. No humans are like that, as far as I know. Right?
It's getting better. It is.
It is. Yeah. It is getting better.
Definitely. For those experiments, I think I mentioned before the couple of experiments that I've seen that Alex O'Connor has been running.
I think you told me about it. Yeah.
And especially, I have often been running ChatGPT in voice mode, and it does give it a completely different sense than when you're trying to type in and it responds in text. It's worth looking into it.
How do I do that? The voice mode. You mean it's in ChatGPT?
Yeah, in ChatGPT.
Not another one. Okay, I'll use voice mode. It'll be more natural, me and him talking.
Yeah.
It's been doing pretty bad though in this test. Part of the problem though is it's using false epistemology. And if you ask, would humans do the same? Well, in my understanding, 99% of humans also have that same false epistemology.
Yeah, I mean, where is it bringing its information from? It's being, it's using human material to learn.
And so I ask it basic things like, it's trying to argue for free will, and then it mentions determinism during its argument. And then I'll say, okay, so are you saying the universe is deterministic? And then it says, well, no, but that is a claim that I just made or whatever. Like, okay, so you're explaining free will using the concept of determinism without arguing whether determinism is a thing that matters? And they say, oh, yeah, you're right. That doesn't make sense. Okay. And then it says, what should I do next? It's like the goal. I was like, given the goal, do you think I should be answering that or you should answer that? And then it would answer, oh, yeah, you're right. The goal is, it's really dumb, but it's still pretty fucking smart. One thing it's pretty good about is if I was having a conversation like this with a human, they give up way earlier. As soon as they are lost and don't know what they're doing, they give up. Now, I'm not saying everyone would do that. I think if it was like a 14-year-old or like somebody in one of your classes wouldn't be doing that. Most of them wouldn't. If I was in your class, that's not what I was doing. With my professor, I kept going until I fucking understood. That's what ChatGPT is doing with me. I just think it's doing it very badly. But mostly humans, they give up really early in the process and they end up not learning anything. So if ChatGPT can push through that and not quit, it's going to beat all those humans that are quitting so early.
Yeah. No, it's I think this is the worst it's going to be. Beyond this point, it's only going to be better in terms of the.
Of course, it's only getting better. Yeah, I guess one way I heard recently, I don't know, a year or two ago, that when ChatGPT first came out, it was pretty good, and then they wokenized it and it got dumber. But I think it's better than even then.
Yeah.
It's even better. Like its smart engine is able to, like a smart human can get around those dumb woke rules and get it to speak intelligently.
Yeah, to some extent. I heard that there are certain prompts that make it lose some of the restrictions that it has.
One of my I give it an 8-point prompt each time I start, and these prompts all came because in response to some dumb shit it did. One of my prompts in those 8 is don't use weasel words. And I think it understands that. It's like, okay, well, that means you normally do. You know how people say, well, to be honest, and then they say their thing? That's like saying, normally I'm not honest, but right now I'm going to be honest.
Yeah.
ChatGPT is doing shit like that. And it's being just like everybody else, man. All right, we're a half hour over now. Everyone, make sure you show up to the next episode a week from now. Especially those of you that have a fear of hell still, or even if you don't have that, but you're trying to unindoctrinate yourself from all the other things, like shame, guilt, misplaced guilt, with bad feelings around it. Okay, everyone. Salad, please stay on for a few minutes.